Hello, and thank you for joining me for another ghost story. This time I will be reading one I've written called Over the Hills and Far Away. It's loosely set in the late 18th century, but I stress the word loosely. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoy. The hissing sound the mud makes as the rising tide washes over it is most unlike any other you might expect to hear. It makes it very clear that spring has arrived, for the sun is now strong enough to dry the estuary. At low tide, our little inlet dries out and drains, except for a small stream running from the steep hillsides. Then, as the tide washes in, it releases bubbles of air trapped in the mud. This is the hissing, crackling noise that I describe. On especially warm days, where the air is still, the hissing is so loud that no other sound from the water is heard. I've often stood on the stone passage that runs from one side of the inlet to the other, and watched as the sea swallows up the shimmering estuary mud, creeps through the inlet, and then reaches the ground just below my feet. It's truly captivating to watch, and hear, the hissing sound, like millions of small insects. Strange that something so unpleasant as mud should make me think of spring and summer. For most, the hawthorn hedgerows, or the cool shade of the oak canopy, or a thunderstorm rolling in off the channel are the heralding cries of the middle month. But for me, it's mud. So as I stand, listening to the hissing sound, I am aware that there are many other things I cannot hear. As if the water is hiding something. Not the march of crabs and small fish, I can see them. Not the seaweed drifting and dragging inland, I can smell it. There is always something else in the water. 11th of April. A warm day, a low mist shrouded the estuary, but we have had bright sunshine since dawn in the inlet. I walked to the harbour near high tide late this morning. The calm weather has meant the water has been unusually still lately. I can see the stone causeway a couple of metres down. When low tide comes this evening, I will take a walk across it and see if I can catch any crabs. Preparations are being made at the village hall for a dance on the 17th of this month, and as I walked back up the hill, I saw some of the local traders rushing in and out of the hall, carrying baskets of spring flowers and bundles of dyed cloth. I've not decided whether I will go. The gulls are squawking and screeching in a terrible cacophony, but otherwise it has been a calm day. 11th of April, evening. I caught 3 crabs while the tide was going out earlier. I tied small scraps of chicken left over from supper to some wire and dangled them across the stone causeway into the water. They are quite large, so I will cook them tomorrow. It's now pitch black outside. Well, that's a lie. Our village and the narrow inlet is a little pool of light, illuminated by the glowing lanterns and house fires. It seems so comforting and safe, set against the vast expanse of darkness in the hills that tower above us. A black mass of dense woodland, reaching up towards the sky, where stars speckle and glow faintly. In the very distance, way down the estuary and out to sea, I can just about see the glow of the lighthouse. It makes me think that just behind these hills, the water stretches for thousands of miles. Who knows what drifts out there? 12th of April, Lord's Day. Church seemed more sparsely attended than usual. Most of the lower village was present. By lower village, I mean the houses around the inlet. Our parish also stretches behind and beyond the woodland. None of the cattle farmers from the back end of the parish were around. I thought this odd at the time, but then thinking about it now, it has been very dry lately, and they will be working hard to keep their herds fed and watered. After church, I walked up to the orchard to check on my fruit trees. A cool, wet winter, and now a dry spring, doesn't seem to have done any harm, and the apple blossom cheerily adorns the still rather bare branches. Last year's crop served me very well, so I am hoping for similar this year. High tide being a little later today, I was able to catch a glimpse of the water washing over the mud. I love the hissing sound. I think the inlet is the only part of the estuary that this happens, as the mud needs to dry out first. It sounds a bit like pouring molten metal into cold water when an ironmonger cools off a newly forged tool. I felt so peaceful walking past the water. The wind was light enough that I could hear each bubble of air pop as the water ran over it. The only other sound about me was that of the songbirds chirping and chatting loudly to each other in the hedgerows and the small trees close to the shore. I will write again this evening, as it looks to be another clear night. 12th of April, evening. Once again I am astonished and perhaps a little frightened by the expanse of black behind the inlet. The village is a small bright cluster set against the dark woodland. But I'm sure there are fewer lights on than yesterday. Maybe some people are working late at the village hall. The dance is only a few days away. That must be it. There are lots of lights visible inside the hall. It's funny, although the moon seems quite bright, it doesn't cast that much light over the land. I suppose it's the shadow of the hill. It does make it impossible to see anything beyond the last row of cottages. I often wonder who lurks there at night. 13th of April. Confusion in the village this morning. John the ironmonger hadn't opened up his shop, and it was almost midday when I went to see him. Some of my tools are rusty from being in such damp conditions all winter, so I thought I'd get them repaired. But when I turned up, a small huddle was gathered outside the bolted door. Having muscled my way into their conversation, it transpires that he had been repairing some of the fixings and hinges in the village hall last night. That explains why all the lights were on there so late, but that no one had seen him since. I asked whether anyone had checked his house, but a group of fishermen had been up to see him for some new hooks and couldn't find him there either. Perhaps more puzzling, his wife, 3 children and hound were all missing as well. There was no sign of a break-in. They were just gone. Reading back through this diary, I noticed I wrote yesterday that there were fewer lights on than the day before. I wonder if one of those was the ironmonger's. 13th of April, evening. After the concerning disappearance of the ironmonger and his family, I headed up to check on my orchard again. I spent a few hours there and enjoyed the warm sunshine as I worked away. This weather means the trees are sprouting new shoots at a phenomenal rate, so there is a lot to be done to make sure they are in the best condition for a good crop of apples. At one point I thought I saw a fairly large animal, like a dog, darting around the bottom of the orchard, but it was very brief, and I often think the afternoon sun plays tricks on the eye. I'm now sitting at my front door, looking out over the village. Perhaps I should count the lights. The village hall lights are extinguished, but other than the inn at the harbour, there are 20 lights on. This means every house, bar that of the ironmonger, of course. Good. 14th of April. The warm weather seems to have brought madness to the natural order of things. I was up at the orchard this morning, not long after dawn, when I heard a clattering of hooves, a lot of shouting, and saw small clouds of dust being kicked up at the harbour. Naturally, I went to have a look and see what the commotion was about. When I arrived, I was astonished, although perhaps I shouldn't have been, given the sounds I heard, to see a herd of cows, disorientated, stumbling around the harbour. Some of the villagers were amused, others angry. A loud conversation was had over the snorting and huffing of the cattle, where a number of people cursed that the farmers had become too relaxed about their herds lately. Myself and a couple of others voiced concerns that we had not seen anyone from the upper village for a number of days, and I remembered they had not been at church. One of the stable boys, Will, I think his name was, and a couple of the fishermen, Oliver and also Will, offered to take the cows back up to the upper village. and began attempting to herd them up the hill. It's a few miles, so I expect they will be back late afternoon. I went past the water on my way back to the orchard. The tide was still fairly low, and the sun hadn't fully dried the mud, but there was still that gentle hissing sound. I sat on the wall and listened for a moment. It eased my mind after the rather disjointed morning I'd had. 15th of April. I forgot to write last night. I dare say I was troubled by yesterday's events. We had all expected both Will and Oliver and Will to return by late afternoon, and they had not. Their families seemed very worried when I saw them outside the village hall, but everyone seemed sure they'd be home by sunset. But this morning they had not returned, and what's more, no one could find their families either. Much like the ironmonger, John, and his family, and I suspect probably the cattle farmers too, they had vanished without trace. I haven't even got to the most peculiar part, though I haven't told anyone this yet, but last night, at about the time I usually write my diary entry, I was looking out across the inlet at the dark forest and hills behind the houses. I was completely convinced even fewer lights were on, so I counted. 17. This means that 3 additional houses were in total darkness. And today I made sure of it. The 3 houses that had no lights on last night were those of Will, Oliver, and Will. There's one more odd thing to recount. As I was heading inside last night, I heard a very deliberate washing sound, like the noise a boat makes as it rows into shore. There was no wind, so it certainly can't have been the waves. From my house there was an excellent view of the inlet, and as much as I peered, it was too dark to be sure, there was no moving boat I could see. A search party of 10 from 7 different houses has been sent to the upper village to try and find the missing people, which may be as many as 30 when I think of the various families now disappeared. I am glad I wasn't asked to go. I have had a bad feeling about this. It's now only 2 days until the dance, and Martha, who is organising it, is determined that it goes ahead. Privately, I do not wish to go. It seems disrespectful when a fifth of the village is missing. 16th of April, early. I forgot to write again last night, but I heard it again, the washing sound. Still no boat, and again no wind. It was even harder to see the water though. We're approaching a new moon. Then the sky will be truly pitch black. I listened closely, and the sound was most definitely that of a rowing boat, the purposeful clear strokes and the lapping of water on wood, crystal clear across the still air. Another thing I saw, or rather didn't see, was the lights across the village. Once more I counted. 10. 7 fewer houses had lights on. 16th of April, late morning. Unfortunately, I had feared the worst, and it came true. I went to the harbour after I last wrote, and sure enough, the 10 people who had set off yesterday had gone missing. As with the previous disappearances, their households had vanished too. This means around half the village has gone in the space of a few days. The atmosphere is very tense, and people seem unwilling to talk to one another. I'll go up to the orchard to find some peace. How odd that I should seek peace in such times by going where no one else goes. 16th of April, evening. The strangest thing happened to me as I was leaving the orchard. Well, strangest is questionable given recent events. As I had packed my bag with my tools and began walking downhill, I heard a familiar sound, a hissing, popping sound, much like the noise the mud makes as the incoming tide washes over it. In itself, this sound isn't odd to me. I hear it all the time. What is odd is that my orchard is nowhere near the water. You can see the inlet below, and you might hear a rowing boat arrive, but you certainly would not hear the mud hissing. Perhaps it was my imagination, but I thought I heard it very clearly. It's very hard to know what's real lately. One small comfort is that the houses that were lit up last night are still lit up this evening. Hopefully that means no more disappearances. 16th of April, late night. I look back through this diary and I'm a little aghast. My handwriting has deteriorated in the space of 5 days, and my style has drifted from brief comments on the weather and goings-on in the village to anxious ramblings. The fact that this is my 4th entry today tells me everything I need to know. 5 days? Is that all? The dance is tomorrow. Maybe this will all turn out to have been a strange game or a misunderstanding, and everyone will return. Some misunderstanding. 17th of April, morning. I got up early to go to the orchard. As I was leaving the house, I thought I heard a rowing boat, and for a moment I was filled with dread. It turned out to be an actual boat. I rushed down to the harbour to see who it was. It turns out that it was one of the fishermen from a village up estuary. He says they've been hearing weird noises and screams coming from our inlet. They're separated from us by water or by a series of hills, including those where the cattle herders were. I explained the disappearances to him, and he expressed concern, but seemed very eager to leave. I'm writing this up at the orchard now. I can't hear any hissing, so at least I can feel some sort of calm. I've paused to eat my lunch. An apple, a hunk of cheese, and some unfortunately dry bread. As I look over to the other side of the inlet, I can't help but be aware of the huge forest that carpets the hills above. Before this week, it seemed just a natural part of my world, but now it carries a dark sense of foreboding. Every time a murder of crows, the official term, disperses from the oaks, it's like an evil flare emanates from the canopy. 17th of April, afternoon. On my way home, I bumped into Martha, preparing for the dance. She was carrying 7 or 8 bottles of spirits, rum, in her arms. I think that given what we've been through these past days, it will take more drink than that. In spite of her being weighed down by bottles, she of course asked me if I'd be coming to the dance. I told her I was. I'm not completely sure I will though. Today has felt oddly normal. People are bustling about as if nothing had happened. I suppose other than pray, it's all one can do in the circumstances. I can't shake off my feeling of unease. I've always been accused of being pessimistic, but while to some the worst seems to be over, to me this is the calm before the storm. Also, has anyone else heard the boat? Or the hissing? 17th of April, evening. I can hear musicians practising in the village hall and people laughing and chatting in their homes. I don't see how they can distract themselves so easily. Half the village has disappeared. I definitely won't go to the dance. Mind you, I don't exactly feel calm sitting here. It's a little later now, and the dance is in full swing. It sounds lively and cheerful. Some lights are still on around the village, which means not everyone is at the dance, though I suspect they'll turn up in due course. The music is a funny mixture of old sea shanties and fashionable dance pieces from London. Well, things take so long to reach us here, I doubt they're still fashionable. Fewer lights are on in the village, so I suppose the remainder of households are heading over now. Oh God, not again. I can hear the washing sound, the rowboat. Why can't I see a boat? There's just enough light by the harbour that I should be able to see anything that size on the water. It's stopped now. Maybe I imagined it. I stopped looking outside for a moment and had some supper. I've not been very hungry and my hands are shaking. I hate feeling like this. I've gone back to sitting at my door, watching the inlet, like a guard on a watchtower. The dance is still going, though they've chosen an old song, Over the Hills and Far Away. It's a good 100 years old, which isn't weird in itself. It's being played quite slowly, especially for a dance. We all shall lead more happy lives by getting rid of brats and wives. that scold and brawl both night and day, over the hills and far. The music has stopped, abruptly. I can't hear any people either. Now all the lamps have extinguished. Nothing at the inn, the harbour, nor any of the houses. Beyond my own home, the only light is from distant villages down estuary and the lighthouse. I can hear it now, the boat again. This time it's a lot nearer, too near, like it's on land somehow. It's accompanied by the hissing sound, also far too close. I've locked myself in my bedchamber upstairs. I can see the faint glow of lamps lit downstairs from under the door, and my room is filled with as much light as I can create. The lamps downstairs and the hearth have been extinguished. It's completely dark outside this room. The washing sound is deafening. It's in the house. The hissing sound is burning, popping, cracking, threatening to pierce my eardrums. I don't know how much longer I can keep writing. Please God, stop this. I can't take it anymore. So, as I stand listening to the hissing sound, I am aware that there are many other things I cannot hear, as if the water is hiding something. Not the march of the crabs and small fish, I can see them. Not the seaweed drifting and dragging inland, I can smell it. There is always something else in the water.